And we did have a power in the Supreme Court, which we lost, and we used to have power in Congress, which we were about to lose, and the only power that we have now is in the General Assembly, and eventually that will, because they get to draw the lines, eventually that will wane. So in 10 years from now, there won't be any Republican power in Pennsylvania anywhere.
See, the thing is, when I went back and looked over stuff, historically, you've always been proven right down the road. You know, you're like the Nostradamus of local politics. How would you change that? If you had a magic wand, how would you change it?
It's too late. We had the root of this is in the early, let's see, in the late 80s. When there was the bribery scandal that enveloped the state treasurer Bud Dwyer and state party chairman Bob Asher. Dwyer killed himself over it on television, as you'll recall, and Asher went to prison. When Asher got out of prison, he wanted to get back involved in Montgomery County politics. The Montgomery County Republican Party told him to go pound sand. So what he did was he ran two people for county commissioner against the incumbent and endorsed candidates for county commissioner and beat them in the primary. Mario Mealy and John Fox beat the incumbents, Paul Bartle and Flo Bloss. And then Mario Mealy and John Fox win in the fall. John got the most votes and Mario got the next most votes. Well, God then spoke to Mario Mealy, if you listen to Mario, and told him that he was to make a deal with the Democrat, Joe Huffle, to cut out Fox. So we had the first time when the people who were anti-Asher were proven right because his candidates ended up screwing up the whole government. Then Marino knocked out Mealy, and we had some success for a while, and then we had a chance to come back if I had gotten elected Attorney General, but Asher didn't want me to advance to Attorney General, so he worked against me, and we ended up with Corbett. So we had a chance there, but we flubbed it. Then when in 2007, when I was elected commissioner with Jim Matthews, he pulled the same thing as Mario Mealy did at the behest of Asher and hooked up again with Joe Huffle, ended up getting himself arrested and ruining the Montgomery County's opportunity to come back as a party. And now we'll never come back. I don't see how it's possible to come back.
Huh. You've been on ID Discovery on several episodes because a lot of cases, and we were talking out there, and you got an opportunity to lead in interesting times because there's a lot of interesting cases. What's it like when they're interviewing you about a case that you've done, and when they do that thing where they go, "That was fantastic, do it again"? Yeah, what's that like?
Honestly, I have done so many television portrayals of cases over the years, dozens and dozens of times, that I don't give it any thought anymore. I do it because somebody thinks these cases are important, and I think it's a tribute to the ability of the detectives that worked on the case and the prosecutors that worked on it with me, that these cases be remembered. And I therefore feel honored to be one of the people who helps keep those memories alive. Sometimes the victims' families are very thankful, and sometimes they're not very happy that the case is being brought up in the news. But you know, it is amazing how quickly people forget. There are some of the cases that you had mentioned before we came on the program that were just so unbelievable in their facts and so gruesome in the way they were carried out that you would think that no one would forget. But if you were only 10 years old or not even born yet, I mean, when you talk about Caleb Fairley, who murdered that absolutely beautiful woman, Lisa Mandrack, and that child, and I'm still close with that family, by the way. Jimmy Mandrack calls me frequently. That's the husband. And when I was running for office one time, he showed up with a check for my campaign just out of the blue and handed it to me. I still stay close to that family, but and that woman, she was absolutely innocent. Strikingly beautiful. Yes. I mean, you can't believe it. It's just unbelievable. She was a statuesque beauty. And you would think that no one would forget that. Well, that case was 28 years ago. I think, is that right? Yeah, it was in 1995, 28 years ago. And if you were born that day, you could be a lawyer or a doctor, and never having known that. And yet, if you ask somebody who's 50 years old, you remember that monster Caleb Fairley, everybody from this area would know who that was. Right.
Or you go up at Limerick and there's a little plaque on a park, you know.
My name is on that. That Mandrack Park, my name is on one of the planks on the fence there. I was there not only when they dedicated it and spoke, I was there when they rededicated it and spoke. But that case it was 28 years ago, and so if you ask somebody who's in their 50s or 60s, they will. If you say Caleb Fairley, their mind immediately flashes to what that monster looked like on the television photos.
Oh yeah.
Of him. If you talk about Guy Saleo and the General Wayne Inn killing, everyone's face immediately goes thinks of Jim Webb and the picture of him with that little turd Saleo with smoking cigars and before he killed him. And yet that case was the murder was in 96, I think, and I think we didn't arrest Saleo until 2000 or 2001. In fact, I remember the police presented me with the arrest warrant for Saleo on my birthday, whatever year that was, which I think it was 2001. There's kind of an interesting story associated with that case. When we were investigating the murder, it was a very, very high profile killing, as you will recall, and it was killing the day after Christmas, and it was just an awful thing, and it happened down in Lower Merion at an iconic restaurant, the General Wayne Inn, and the Jim Webb's wife was not happy with how the investigation was progressing, and all murder cases at that point I was in charge of as first assistant DA, and she had demanded a meeting with District Attorney Marino and me and the lead detectives. So she comes in and she lambastes us to the boss, who was trying to walk the line between defending his people and not acting inappropriately to the wife of a man who was just murdered. And at that point, I had gained some significant notoriety for having won a number of high-profile, serious murders. And we tried to explain what we had done. And finally, as we were wrapping up the meeting, I said to her that I promised that when we arrested the killer, I would handle the case personally. Well, it never occurred to me that it would take us 6 years to solve the case, and that I would then be the DA. So when we arrested Guy Saleo, I felt obligated to make good on that promise to prosecute him personally. Well, the political establishment that was hoping I was going to become Attorney General and then hopefully Governor was very disappointed in my decision to handle that case, because the press never understood the circumstantial nature of that case. The case was there was no direct evidence. It was all circumstantial evidence. Now, it was extraordinarily strong circumstantial evidence case, but I had never explained to the whole world how those pieces fit together, because I didn't want the bad guy to know what I had and how I was going to fit them together. So I had to endure all of this publicity about this unwinnable case, and that it was no way that they're going to ever win this case, and defense attorneys opining in this, and editorials, and the whole rest of it.
But then you won. You were right.
Well, the political establishment was so worried that I was going to lose this high-profile case and would doom my chances to move up politically, that the head of the party, who was an extraordinarily good friend of mine and a very, very bright lawyer, a very, very smart man, Frank Bartle, called me and in his very oblique way suggested that maybe it might not be a good idea that I handle that case myself. And I said that there's no question that I have to do it myself because I had told the widow I was going to do it. You can't back off of a statement like that. Well, he understood that. And then, of course, when the case plays out and I put the case pieces together, all of a sudden, this nationally publicized case with the media there sees how good the case really is. And I got a whole lot of favorable publicity out of winning the case, and a lot of red-faced media people apologizing for their dire forecasts.
Well, Caleb Fairley was also circumstantial stuff, but that was the first case that DNA was used in Montgomery County, wasn't it?
Yes, it was the first time DNA evidence was used in a murder case, and it was a very interesting time for forensics. This was in the early 1990s, or I guess it was mid 90s, and we were under enormous pressure because in order to find Lisa Mandrak's body, we traded away the death penalty to find where her body was located, because the child, who we had discovered earlier in the day of the disappearance, had no forensics. We recovered no forensics from the child. So the gamble was that we would get forensics from the mother, but if she had been on fire or it was in water or some other medium that makes forensics difficult, there was a risk. And people may not recall that we were now several days into looking for her, and it was still Indian summer. It was always cold at night, but warm during the day. And I was very concerned about animals eating her. The bad guy had scratches on his face, and we theorized that Lisa Mandrak might have had skin cells under her fingernails. And I have been around a lot of bodies that had been exposed to the weather, and I know that fingers and toes and places that are exposed are the ones that the animals will nibble on first. Yeah. And I was very concerned about that. So Mr. Marino made that decision. It was my idea, but Mr. Marino made that decision and got an enormous amount of backlash, a tremendous backlash about it. So when we did recover her body and we did take the fingernail scrapings, I surreptitiously, with detectives, because the press would stake out my car to try to get some comment on what we were doing. So I surreptitiously, under assumed names, drove with the detectives to Connecticut to see the renowned forensic scientist Henry Lee. Now, at the time, Henry Lee was testifying in favor of O.J. Simpson. And the people of Connecticut got so ticked off that he was helping the murderer, quote unquote, Simpson, that they complained to the General Assembly and the governor in Connecticut, and the governor issued an order that Henry Lee was not allowed to work on any other cases other than cases from Connecticut law enforcement. So when I asked him, he had testified in another case for me. When I asked him to do this case, he said, "I can't do it. The governor has refused to permit me to do it." So, I pick up the telephone. I called the governor's office in Connecticut, and I asked for the governor's secretary, and I explained to the secretary what the problem is. And she says, "Hold on a second." The chief of staff comes on the phone. Turns out he's a former state prosecutor in Connecticut. And I tell him what the problem is. He says, "I'll call you back." 20 minutes later, he calls back. He said, "I interrupted the governor. I told him what the problem was, and he said that you'll have the full cooperation of the state of Connecticut and anything you need." So I got permission to go use Henry. So we go up there, And remember, we don't want the world to know that we're trying this newfangled thing called DNA, because it had never been used before in Montgomery County, maybe not even in Pennsylvania, I don't recall. And because we were desperate to prove that we were right in making sure we got that body before the animals chewed her fingers. And so we were afraid that we would look like a desperation. Oh, it was also an election year for D.A. Marino. This was in September, and the election was in November. So this was of great significance to us that we do it.